Danny Cole was not the kind of man that stories were usually written about. He was 43 years old, with gray creeping into his brown hair, and a bad knee that ached whenever the air pressure changed on whatever station or ship he happened to be on. He had a slow way of talking that made people lean in closer to hear him, and a habit of looking out of viewports for long stretches of time without saying anything. He had spent 20 years hauling freight across the empty spaces between colony worlds, and those years had left him comfortable with silence in a way that made most other species uneasy. He was sitting in his quarters aboard the UEC diplomatic vessel Steadfast, reading through a report Lisa Grant had sent him, when the ship's gentle hum shifted just slightly. Most people would not have noticed, but Danny had lived inside ships for 2 decades. He knew their sounds the way a farmer knows weather. Something had changed in the Steadfast's power distribution. A subtle rerouting that meant the ship's sensors had been pushed to a higher alert level. He set the report down and looked out the viewport. The station called Haven's Reach floated in the darkness outside, a massive ring of metal and light orbiting a gas giant whose swirling clouds painted the black with shades of amber and red. Haven's Reach was neutral ground, a place where dozens of species came together to trade, negotiate, and occasionally pretend they trusted each other. It was where the Galactic Ethics Tribunal had scheduled the preliminary hearing for the case against Darul. Danny had not wanted any of this. 6 months ago, he had been a freight captain. His biggest worry had been whether his cargo insurance would cover a delayed shipment of agricultural equipment to a colony on the Outer Rim. Now he was at the center of the biggest trafficking case the galaxy had seen in a century, and apparently, someone wanted him dead for it. He knew about the contract. Megan Price, the head of his security detail, had told him in broad terms. Someone had put a price on his head. A very large price. She had not told him the exact number, because she said it was not helpful information, and Danny suspected she was right about that. Knowing the specific amount of money someone was willing to spend to end your life was the kind of knowledge that could eat a person alive if they thought about it too long. Megan Price was a woman who could sit perfectly still for hours, and then move so fast you would swear she had been in 2 places at once. She was shorter than Danny by a full head, with dark hair she kept tied back, and brown eyes that never seemed to stop calculating. She had served in the Colonial Defense Forces for 15 years before transferring to diplomatic security, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested many times and had never come up short. She did not talk about her past, and Danny had learned not to ask. She came to his quarters that evening to give him an update. She stood near the door, as she always did, never fully inside a room, always positioned where she could see the corridor behind her and the space in front of her at the same time. "Anything I should worry about?" Danny asked. "No," Megan said. "That's what you always say, because it is always true. Worrying is my job. Yours is to eat dinner, get some sleep, and be ready to give clear testimony when the time comes." Danny smiled a little. She had a way of making the most dangerous situations feel manageable, not by pretending the danger did not exist, but by making it clear that she had already accounted for it and planned 3 steps ahead. What Danny did not know was that Megan had spent the last 48 hours in a state of focused intensity that would have broken most people. She had mapped every maintenance corridor, ventilation shaft, and emergency airlock within 3 levels of Danny's quarters. She had placed microsensors at 16 different points along every possible approach route. She had reviewed the security profiles of every non-human on the station who had arrived in the last week. She had slept for a total of 4 hours across 2 days, and those 4 hours had been taken in 20-minute intervals, with one hand resting on her sidearm. She had also sent a message through the UEC's deep relay network, a system of encrypted communication nodes that stretched across human space like an invisible web. The message was short and followed a format that every human in the military and intelligence services recognized instantly. It read, "Guardian Protocol, active threat on protected citizen, requesting network awareness." That message traveled at faster than light speeds through relay after relay, reaching every human vessel, outpost, intelligence station, and embassy within 50 light years. There was no dramatic response. No fleets were mobilized. No alarms were sounded. But, across a vast stretch of the galaxy, human eyes opened a little wider. Human ears listened a little more carefully. And human hands moved a little closer to the tools of their trade. This was the thing that most species did not understand about humans. They looked at human civilization and saw a loose collection of colony worlds, a modest military, a diplomatic corps that spent more time talking than fighting. They saw a species that was physically unremarkable, shorter-lived than most, without natural armor or venom or the ability to see in the dark. They saw a species that should have been easy to push around. What they did not see was the network. It had no official name. It was not a single organization or a chain of command. It was something deeper and older than that, something woven into the basic fabric of how humans related to each other. When a human was threatened, the information moved. It moved through official channels and unofficial ones. It moved through military intelligence and through cargo pilots gossiping at fuel stations. It moved through diplomats and through bartenders and through retired soldiers who still checked their encrypted channels out of habit every morning. The information moved, and then the humans moved. Not all at once, not in a great wave. They moved like water, finding its way downhill. Each person adjusting their position just slightly. Each ship changing its patrol route by a few degrees. Each intelligence officer pulling one more file, making one more inquiry, having one more quiet conversation. Individually, none of these actions meant anything. Together, they formed a net that was slowly, invisibly tightening around anyone who might wish Danny Cole harm. Lisa Grant arrived at Danny's quarters an hour after Megan left. Lisa was 31, with sharp features and the kind of energy that made a room feel smaller when she walked into it. She carried a datapad that was never more than arm's reach away, and she had a habit of talking quickly when she was excited about a legal argument, which was most of the time. "I've finished the preliminary brief," she said, sitting down across from Danny and immediately pulling up documents on her datapad. "The evidence chain is solid. The shipping manifests, the financial records, the sensor logs from the cargo holds you inspected. Darul's lawyers are going to try to argue that the manifests were falsified, but we have independent verification from 3 different species trade monitoring systems." Danny nodded. "And the witnesses?" "Sketh, Darul's own lieutenant, has been making noise through back channels about cooperating. He is not there yet, but he is getting closer. And we have the testimony of 2 Thessian inspectors who were blocked from examining Darul's ships last year. Plus your own first-hand account." He thought about the cargo hold he had walked through on that border station, the one that had changed everything. It had been cold inside, much colder than a normal hold. The lights were dim. There were rows of enclosures along the walls, small and cramped, with sedation systems built into the ceilings. Most of the enclosures had been empty by the time he got there. But one had not been empty. A small child of a species Danny did not recognize had been curled up in the corner, barely conscious, with a string of numbers tattooed along her arm. She had reached out and taken his hand, her grip weak and trembling, and she had looked up at him with eyes that did not understand what was happening, but understood that she was afraid. Danny had stood there holding that child's hand for a long time. He had not cried. He had not shouted. He had simply stood there and made a decision that he was going to do whatever it took to make sure this never happened again. no matter what it cost him. He looked at Lisa. When do we testify? 11 days. Then let's make sure we are ready. Outside the viewport, Haven's Reach continued its slow orbit around the gas giant. Somewhere in the corridors of the station, aliens from 40 different species went about their business, many of them casting curious glances at the small human delegation whenever they passed. Word had spread about the contract on the human's life, and the station hummed with a low, nervous energy. The station's administrator, a Thessian named Mivari, had quietly doubled the security presence around the human delegation section. She had not done this because she thought the humans could not protect themselves. She had done it because she had read the histories, and she knew what happened when someone attacked humans on a station full of bystanders. The humans always survived. It was everyone else she was worried about. And far away, in the cold darkness between stars, a ship called the Quiet Meridian adjusted its course by 2 degrees and slipped into the sensor shadow of Haven's Reach without making a sound. Its commander, a woman named Hannah Webb, poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down in her command chair, and began to wait with the patience of someone who had done this many times before. The Krethva were not the kind of species that other species invited to diplomatic functions. They were large, heavily built, with thick gray skin and jaws that could crack metal plating. They lived on the fringes of known space, raiding frontier settlements and hijacking cargo ships. They were brutal and direct, and they had earned a reputation across the outer territories as the kind of problem you either paid off or avoided entirely. Their captain was a scarred old pirate named Voss. He had been raiding ships for 30 years, and his body showed it. One of his eyes was missing, replaced by a crude cybernetic implant that glowed a dull orange. 3 of his teeth were metal. A long burn scar ran from his jaw to his collarbone, a souvenir from a fuel cell explosion on a ship he had been trying to steal 12 years ago. Voss was not brave. He was desperate. His crew had not had a successful raid in 4 months. Half his crew was talking about leaving. When Darul's offer reached him through a chain of intermediaries, Voss looked at the number and felt his heart beat faster. Even a fraction of that money would set him and his crew up for the rest of their lives. The target was a human. Voss had heard of humans, but he had never dealt with them directly. The Krethva operated far from human space, in the wild territories where law was a suggestion and survival was the only real currency. To Voss, humans were just another soft species. Small bodies, no claws, no armor, short lives. He did not understand why the number attached to this contract was so high, but he was not in a position to ask questions. He was in a position to take the money and do the job. He assembled a strike team of 12 from his best fighters. They armed themselves with plasma cutters, kinetic rifles, and close-quarters blades. They loaded into a stolen cargo shuttle and approached Haven's Reach using forged transit codes that Darul's people had provided. The codes worked. The outer security perimeter let them through without a second look. Voss felt good. This was going to be simple. Get in, find the human, kill him, get out. He had done harder jobs 100 times. The shuttle docked at a maintenance port on the station's lower level. The 12 Krethva moved out in 2 groups of 6. The first group, led by a fighter named Gretsch, would move through the maintenance tunnels to the residential level and hit the humans' quarters directly. The second group would hold a position at the intersection of 2 main corridors to cover the retreat and deal with any station security that responded. They moved quickly and quietly, which was impressive for a species of their size. The maintenance tunnels were dark and narrow, designed for service drones and small repair crews, and the Krethva had to duck and squeeze through several sections. But they were used to tight spaces. Pirate ships were not known for generous floor plans. Gretsch's team reached the residential level first. They emerged from a maintenance hatch into a dimly lit corridor and formed up in a standard assault line. Their target's quarters were 400 meters ahead, around 2 corners. Gretsch checked his weapon, signaled his team, and moved forward. They rounded the first corner and found the corridor empty. They rounded the second corner and stopped. A woman was standing in the middle of the corridor. She was alone. She was small by HFY standards, barely reaching the chest of the shortest member of Gretsch's team. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face. Her hands were at her sides. She was not holding a weapon. Megan Price looked at the 6 HFY standing in front of her and felt the world slow down the way it always did in moments like this. She had been tracking their movement through the maintenance tunnels for the last 7 minutes, using the microsensors she had placed 2 days ago. She knew exactly how many they were, what weapons they carried, and which route they had taken. She had positioned herself at this specific point in the corridor because the ceiling was low here, the walls were close, and the HFY would not be able to spread out or use their size advantage. She spoke clearly and without raising her voice. "You have one chance to turn around. Take it." Gretsch looked at the small human woman standing alone in front of 6 armed HFY fighters, and he laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that echoed off the metal walls. He raised his kinetic rifle and took a step forward. Megan moved. She had studied the HFY species profile during her preparation. She knew their strengths, which were considerable. They were strong, tough, and could absorb damage that would kill most species. But she also knew their weaknesses. Their joints were stiff, which made them slow to pivot. Their compound eyes gave them wide peripheral vision, but poor depth perception at close range. And they relied heavily on their size to intimidate, which meant most of them had never learned to fight someone who was not afraid of them. She closed the distance to Gretsch before he finished raising his rifle. She did not try to match his strength. Instead, she went low, inside his reach, where his size became a disadvantage. She struck the nerve cluster on the inside of his elbow, and his hand spasmed open, dropping the rifle. In the same motion, she drove her knee into the joint of his forward leg, which buckled sideways with a sound like a tree branch breaking. Gretsch went down hard, his massive body slamming into the corridor wall. The 5 remaining HFY reacted, but they reacted the way most fighters do when something unexpected happens. They hesitated, just for a second, just long enough. Megan used the fallen Gretsch's body as cover, and moved through the group like water flowing through rocks. She did not stand still. She did not fight any of them head-on. She targeted joints, nerve clusters, and the sensitive spots behind their ear plates that she had memorized from the species database. Each strike was precise, calculated, and delivered with exactly enough force to disable without killing. A shattered knee here, a dislocated shoulder there, a nerve strike to the throat that left one fighter conscious, but unable to move anything below his neck. It took her 87 seconds. When it was over, 6 HFY fighters lay on the corridor floor in various states of pain and immobility. All of them were alive. All of them were conscious. Megan had made sure of that. Dead attackers could not tell you who sent them, and more importantly, dead attackers could not go back to their people and tell the story of what had happened. The second team heard the noise and came running. They charged down a side corridor toward the sounds of their companions, weapons ready, expecting to find station security or a firefight. Instead, they ran directly into Chris Palmer and Amy Ross, the 2 other members of Megan's security detail, who had been waiting in a parallel corridor for exactly this moment. Chris Palmer was a tall, quiet man who had a gift for being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Amy Ross was the youngest member of the team, 26 years old, with steady hands and an ability to stay calm under pressure that impressed even Megan. Together, they caught the second team in a crossfire of precise stun shots from both ends of the corridor. The HFY, boxed in and unable to maneuver, went down in seconds. Voss sat in the stolen cargo shuttle and waited. He had expected the operation to take 20 minutes at most. After 30 minutes, he tried to contact Gretch. No response. After 45 minutes, he tried again. Nothing. After an hour, a cold sweat began to form on his thick skin. He reached for the shuttle's navigation controls, ready to cut his losses and run. The controls did not respond. He tried again. The system had been locked out remotely, and a message was blinking on his display screen, requesting that he stand by for communication. A voice came through the shuttle speakers. It was calm and conversational, the way someone might sound while discussing the weather or ordering a meal. The voice identified herself as Commander Hannah Webb of the UEC intelligence vessel Quiet Meridian, and she informed Voss that his crew was alive and in custody, that his shuttle was going nowhere, and that she would very much like to talk to him about who had hired him and why. Voss stared at the speakers. He looked out the shuttle's viewport and saw nothing. No ship, no fleet, just the empty blackness of space and the distant glow of the gas giant. The human ship was out there somewhere, close enough to lock his systems and open a communication channel. But he could not see it. He could not detect it on any sensor. It might as well have been a ghost. He sat back in his chair and felt something he had not felt in 30 years of piracy. He felt the sudden sinking understanding that he was completely and utterly out of his depth. He had walked into something that he did not understand, and the people on the other side of it had been ready for him before he had even decided to come. The humans were not scrambling. They were not panicking. They were not even particularly angry. They had simply been waiting, the way a trap waits, patient and still and perfectly designed, and Voss had walked right into it because he had been too desperate and too ignorant to see it for what it was. He put his hands on the console where the humans could see them through the shuttle's internal cameras, and he waited for whatever came next. In the residential corridor, Megan Price stood among the groaning Krethva and touched her earpiece. "All clear," she said. 12 hostiles. All contained. No casualties. Send a medical team for them. Some of these joints are going to need attention." She paused and allowed herself one slow breath. Then she walked back toward Danny's quarters to tell him that everything was fine and that he should try to get some sleep. Danny, who had been reading a report and had heard nothing, looked up at her with mild surprise when she came in. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is fine," Megan said, and to her credit, she almost made it sound routine. The news spread through the galactic underworld like fire through dry grass. 12 armed Krethva pirates had attempted to kill a human on Haven's Reach, and all 12 had been taken down by a 3-person security detail that had barely broken a sweat. No one died. No shots were fired by the humans. The entire thing had been handled so cleanly and so quietly that most of the station's residents did not even know it had happened until hours later. In every dark bar, hidden meeting room, and encrypted communication channel where killers gathered and talked, the story was told and retold. The details grew sharper with each telling, not more exaggerated, but more precise, because the people telling the story were professionals who understood exactly what had happened and exactly what it meant. A single human woman had disabled 6 Krethva fighters in close quarters in under 90 seconds. She had deliberately left them alive. She had known they were coming before they even entered the station. Every assassin who had refused Darul's contract felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Lorvax, sitting alone in the sinking nebula on Crucible Point, heard the news and said nothing. He simply finished his drink and ordered another. He had tried to warn them. They had not listened. They never listened. Back on the Steadfast, Danny Cole sat in his quarters and tried to process what Megan had told him during her morning briefing. 12 armed attackers had come to kill him in the night, and he had slept through the entire thing. He was not sure how to feel about that. Grateful, certainly. But there was something else beneath the gratitude. A quiet shame that other people were putting themselves in danger because of a decision he had made. Megan saw it in his face and addressed it directly. "You did the right thing when you reported what you found in those cargo holds," she said. "That is why you are here. My job is to make sure you stay here long enough to finish what you started. Do not make the mistake of feeling guilty about being protected. The people in those cargo holds did not have anyone to protect them. You are giving them that. So let us do our part, and you do yours." Danny nodded. He did not fully believe her, but he appreciated the clarity. Lisa Grant reacted to the attack with the sharp efficiency of someone who had just been handed an unexpected gift. She filed an emergency motion with the Galactic Ethics Tribunal within hours, arguing that the attempted assassination of a protected witness constituted an aggravating offense that warranted immediate expedited proceedings. The tribunal, already sympathetic to the case, agreed unanimously. The trial date was moved forward by 6 days. Darul's legal window was shrinking fast, and he knew it. Meanwhile, aboard the Quiet Meridian, Commander Hannah Webb conducted her interrogation of Voss. The word interrogation was perhaps too strong for what actually happened. Hannah was a small woman with light brown hair and a voice that sounded like she was permanently on the edge of a friendly smile. She sat across a table from Voss in a plain room with good lighting and comfortable chairs, and she talked to him. She did not threaten him. She did not raise her voice. She did not even ask him questions at first. She simply told him stories. She told him about the Karathi incident, where a minor warlord named Dreth had kidnapped 3 human aid workers who were running a medical clinic on a border world. Dreth had thought he could use them as bargaining chips in a territorial dispute. Within 2 weeks, human intelligence agencies had identified every member of Dreth's organization. Within 2 months, they had mapped his entire network of allies, supply routes, and safe houses. Within 6 months, every single person involved in the kidnapping had been located and arrested. Not killed, arrested, brought before a court, given a trial, convicted, sentenced, every single one. She told him about the siege of Fenwick Colony, where a fleet of xeno-supremacist ships had bombarded a human settlement on an agricultural world, killing 214 colonists, including 47 children. The human response had not been immediate. It had taken 3 months. During those 3 months, the humans had identified the fleet, tracked every ship, mapped the command structure, located the leaders, and built a legal case so comprehensive that it filled 17,000 pages. Then they had acted simultaneously across 4 star systems, in a coordinated operation that lasted less than 6 hours. Every ship was captured. Every leader was taken alive. The trial lasted a year. The convictions were unanimous. Hannah told Voss these stories in her friendly conversational voice, and she watched his face change as the meaning sank in. She was not threatening him. She was educating him. She was showing him the shape of the thing he had walked into, so that he could understand, with full clarity, what his options were. Voss understood. He was not an intelligent man by most standards, but he was a survivor, and survivors know when to stop fighting. He gave Hannah everything. Names, account numbers, communication logs, the encrypted channel Darul's intermediary had used to contact him, the forged transit codes, and the location of 3 hidden safe houses where Darul kept emergency funds and escape ships. Hannah thanked him politely, offered him a cup of something warm to drink, and left the room. The information moved quickly. Hannah fed it through UEC intelligence channels, which passed the relevant portions to the Galactic Ethics Tribunal through proper diplomatic protocols. Every piece of evidence was documented, verified, and presented through legal means. The humans were very careful about this. They always were. They understood that the power of their response depended on its legitimacy. If they cut corners, if they broke laws, If they acted outside the bounds of galactic legal frameworks, their enemies could use that against them. So they did everything by the book, and they did it faster and more thoroughly than anyone else in the galaxy could manage. Darul received word of Voss's capture and cooperation through his own intelligence network, which was rapidly crumbling. Allies who had once returned his messages within minutes were now taking hours, then days, then not responding at all. His financial accounts were being flagged by the galactic banking systems, one by one, as the tribunal's reach expanded. The walls were closing in. He made a decision to run. He would take his personal ship, flee to the outer territories beyond the reach of the tribunal, and rebuild somewhere new. He had done it before, decades ago, when he was young and hungry. He could do it again. He walked to his private docking bay on Crucible Point and boarded his ship, a fast and expensive Velnoxy cruiser equipped with the best stealth technology money could buy. He powered up the engines and requested departure clearance from the station's traffic control. The request was denied. His ship had been flagged by the Galactic Transit Authority. No reason was given, but Darul did not need one. He knew. The humans had done it. They had filed the flag through diplomatic channels, quietly, through official channels, probably days ago. Before the attack on Danny, before Voss had even accepted the contract. They had anticipated that he might try to run, and they had closed the door before he even reached it. Darul sat in the cockpit of his expensive ship and stared at the denied departure notice on his screen. For the first time in decades, he felt something he had not felt since he was a young Velnoxy struggling to survive in the slums of his homeworld. He felt small. He felt like the galaxy was much bigger and much more dangerous than he had allowed himself to believe. And he had made the mistake of drawing the attention of something that was bigger and more patient than he was. Sketh, who had watched everything unfold with growing horror, made his own calculation. He was a practical creature. He had served Darul because it was profitable, not because he was loyal. Now that the profit was gone and the danger was very real, his loyalty evaporated like water on a hot engine. He contacted the Galactic Ethics Tribunal through a back channel and offered his full cooperation. He would testify against Darul. He would provide internal records, communication logs, and first-hand accounts of the trafficking operations he had witnessed over the years. In exchange, he wanted leniency. The tribunal accepted. Sketh's testimony was recorded in a secure chamber at Haven's Reach. He sat before the tribunal officials, his compound eyes dull with exhaustion, and he spoke for 11 hours straight. He described the trafficking routes, the buyers, the methods of capture and transport, the bribes paid to officials on dozens of worlds. He described the cargo holds, the sedation protocols, the inventory systems. He described it all in flat, emotionless detail, like a technician reading a maintenance report. At the end of his testimony, one of the tribunal judges, an elderly Thessian with silver-streaked scales, asked Sketh a simple question. Why did your employer not listen to the warnings about targeting the human? Sketh was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I told him not to target the human. Everyone told him, you do not go after humans. It is the one rule every species in this galaxy knows. He would not listen. He believed that his money made him stronger than the rule. The rule exists because it is true. And it is true because the humans made it true. And they made it true by being exactly what they are. They are not the strongest species. They are not the fastest or the toughest. But they are the most thorough. When they decide something matters, they do not stop until it is done. They do not stop when it becomes difficult. They do not stop when it becomes expensive. They do not stop when it becomes dangerous. They simply do not stop. The tribunal judge nodded slowly and made a note. The recording was added to the official case file. In his quarters aboard the Steadfast, Danny Cole was preparing for his own testimony. Lisa Grant had walked him through the process a dozen times. She told him to speak clearly, to answer only what was asked, to tell the truth without embellishment. He practiced in front of the viewport, watching his own faint reflection in the glass, and wondered if anything he said would be enough to make a difference. Megan stood by the door and watched him practice. She did not tell him, because it was not her way to say things like this out loud, but she was proud of him. He was a freight captain who had stumbled into something terrible and had chosen to stand up instead of walk away. He was not a hero in any dramatic sense. He was just a decent man who had decided that some things were worth the cost. That, Megan knew from long experience, was the most dangerous kind of human there was. The Grand Judicial Chamber of the Galactic Ethics Tribunal on Lyreth Prime was built to hold 1,000 beings, and on the day of Danny Cole's testimony, every seat was filled. Representatives from over 40 species sat in tiered rows that curved around a central platform where the witness would stand. The ceiling was high and domed, inlaid with panels that displayed the star maps of every species that had signed the Galactic Charter. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, filling the chamber with a soft, even glow that left no shadows. Danny stood in a small preparation room behind the main chamber, and tried to keep his hands from shaking. He was wearing a simple dark suit that Lisa Grant had brought him, and he had shaved for the first time in a week. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a tired man with gray hair and worry lines around his eyes. He did not look like someone who was about to change galactic law. He looked like someone who needed a good night's sleep and a long vacation. Lisa was beside him, running through last-minute notes on her datapad. "Remember," she said, "they are going to try to rattle you. Darul's legal team will challenge your credentials, your motives, your memory. Do not get defensive. Just tell the truth, the way you told it to me. Simply and clearly." Danny nodded. Simply and clearly. Megan was at the door, watching the corridor. Katie Moore had arrived that morning with a full UEC diplomatic delegation, and the human presence in the chamber was larger than it had been at any tribunal proceeding in recent memory. Katie had done this deliberately. She wanted the galaxy to see that humanity took this seriously, not as a show of force, but as a statement of values. Katie herself was a tall woman with short silver hair and the kind of steady gaze that made other diplomats choose their words carefully. She had known Danny for 20 years, since they were both young and working entry-level jobs on a colony station in the middle of nowhere. She had watched him grow into the kind of man who would never seek out trouble, but would never walk away from it either. When she had asked him to take the diplomatic role, she had known exactly what kind of person she was putting into the field. She had counted on him being exactly who he was. The tribunal was called to order. The judges, a panel of 7 drawn from 7 different species, took their seats at the elevated bench. The lead judge was a Thessian elder named Counselor Veth, known across the galaxy for her fairness and her sharp mind. She opened the proceedings with a brief statement about the gravity of the charges and the importance of the testimony that was about to be given. Danny was called to the platform. He walked out into the chamber and felt 1,000 eyes turn toward him. The room was enormous, and he felt very small standing in the center of it. He could see the alien faces in the tiered seats above him, some curious, some skeptical, some watching with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He found Katie's face in the human delegation section. She gave him a small nod. He found Megan standing near an exit with her arms at her sides and her eyes scanning the room. She did not nod. She did not need to. Her presence was enough. Danny took a breath and began to speak. He did not give a grand speech. He did not use dramatic language or emotional appeals. He spoke the way he always spoke, quietly and directly, in the simple words of a man who had spent his life among cargo manifests and engine reports and the honest, unglamorous work of keeping things moving between worlds. He told them about the border station. He told them about the trade dispute he had been sent to inspect. He told them about the shipping manifests he had found buried in Darul's records, the ones with entries that did not match any known commodity code. He told them how he had traced those entries to a specific cargo hold on a specific ship, and how he had gone to that hold and opened the door. He told them about the cold, the dim lights, the rows of enclosures along the walls, small and cramped, with sedation systems built into the ceilings, and waste recyclers that had not been cleaned in weeks. He told them about the inventory numbers, strings of digits tattooed onto living skin, marking each being like a piece of equipment. He told them about the child. He paused here, not for effect, but because the memories still caught in his throat every time he reached it. The chamber was silent, 1,000 beings holding their breath. He told them about the small alien child he had found in one of the enclosures. She was barely conscious, her eyes half closed, her body thin from sedation and neglect. She was of a species Danny did not recognize, from a world that had not yet achieved space travel. She did not know what a human was. She did not know where she was or how she had gotten there. But when Danny knelt down beside her enclosure and reached his hand through the bars, she had taken it. Her grip was weak and her fingers were trembling, and she had held onto his hand the way a drowning person holds onto a rope. Danny's voice broke once, just slightly, on the word held. He paused, swallowed, and continued. He told the tribunal that he had sat with that child for 40 minutes before the medical team arrived. He told them that she had fallen asleep still holding his hand. He told them that he had made a promise to himself in that moment, sitting on the cold floor of that cargo hold, that he would do whatever it took to make sure the people responsible were held accountable. When he finished, the chamber was still. Several of the alien delegates had looked away. A Thessian diplomat in the upper tier was weeping openly, tears running down her scaled cheeks without any attempt to hide them. Even the judges sat motionless for a long moment before Counselor Veth quietly thanked Danny for his testimony and called for a brief recess. Lisa Grant presented the evidence next. She was precise and thorough, walking the tribunal through the financial records, the communication logs, Sketh's testimony, the documentation of the assassination attempt, and the intelligence gathered from Voss's cooperation. The case was built like a fortress, every piece supporting the next, with no gaps and no weak points. Darul appeared via secure holographic link from his detained vessel. He looked diminished. His silver eyes, which had once projected cold authority, now darted nervously around the chamber. His legal team attempted a defense, claiming human interference, witness intimidation, and illegal surveillance. They argued that the UEC's response to the assassination attempt was disproportionate and constituted a violation of sovereign species rights. Katie Moore rose to respond. She stood at the diplomatic podium and spoke without notes, her silver hair catching the light of the chamber. She acknowledged that humans are protective of their people. She did not apologize for it. She stated that the UEC had responded to a credible threat against a civilian witness with the minimum force necessary. All attackers survived. All were given medical care and legal representation. Every action taken by human personnel was documented, legal, and within the bounds of galactic law. Then she added something that had not been in any of the case files. She told the tribunal that UEC intelligence had identified 14 additional trafficking routes connected to Darul's network, affecting sentient species from 22 worlds. She offered the complete intelligence package to the tribunal, without conditions. She said the UEC was prepared to support any joint enforcement action the tribunal chose to authorize. She sat down. The chamber buzzed with quiet conversation. The tribunal deliberated for less than 2 hours. Darul was found guilty on all counts. His empire was ordered dissolved. His assets were seized and placed into a reparations fund for trafficking victims. He was sentenced to permanent confinement on a penal station in deep space, with no possibility of release. When the verdict was read, Danny Cole closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 6 months. The final scene took place far from Lyrith Prime, back in the dim and nameless bar on Crucible Point, where the story had started. Lorvax sat in his usual booth in the sinking nebula, watching the verdict scroll across a holoscreen mounted on the wall. The bar was quiet. A few other patrons watched the screen, with expressions ranging from interest to unease. A young Rethani assassin, new to the profession and full of the confidence that comes with not yet knowing how the galaxy really works, sat down across from Lorvax without being invited. He ordered a drink and nodded at the screen. "I do not understand," the young Rethani said. "Everyone acts like humans are some kind of unstoppable force. But look at them. They are small. They are fragile. They do not have claws or venom or armored skin. What is everyone so afraid of?" Lorvax looked at the young assassin for a long time. Then he took a slow drink and set his glass down. He told the young Rethani that he had once watched a human documentary about an Earth predator called a wolf. "A single wolf," he explained, "is not particularly frightening. It is smaller than many of the animals it hunts. It can be outrun, outfought, and outlasted by dozens of other species on its own planet. But wolves do not operate alone. When one wolf is threatened, the pack responds. And the pack does not charge in blindly. It circles. It watches. It learns the terrain. It identifies the weaknesses. And then it moves. Together, coordinated, relentless, until the hunt is over." Lorvax paused and looked at the holoscreen, where the details of Darul's sentence were still scrolling. "But humans are not wolves," he said. "Wolves stop hunting when the threat is gone. Humans do not stop. They build systems to make sure the threat never comes back. They write laws. They create tribunals. They share what they learn. They remember. A wolf pack protects its territory. Humans protect every single member of their species, anywhere in the galaxy, no matter how far away, no matter how long it takes." He looked back at the young Rethani and spoke slowly, so the words would stick. "You want to know why the deadliest hitmen in the galaxy will not take a contract on a human? It is not because we cannot kill one. It is because you cannot kill just one. You kill one human, and you are at war with all of them. And they don't lose wars. They just have not finished winning yet." The young Rethani stared at the holoscreen for a long time. Then he stood up, left his untouched drink on the table, walked out of the bar, and was never seen at Crucible Point again. Far away, aboard the Steadfast, Danny Cole sat by a viewport and watched the stars drift past. Megan Price stood nearby, arms folded, allowing herself the faintest trace of a smile. Lisa Grant was already buried in her datapad, preparing for the next case, because there was always a next case. Katie Moore sent a short encrypted message to the UEC Council that read simply, "Witness safe, case closed, network holds." Somewhere in the vast quiet between the stars, the network continued to hum. It was not loud. It was not visible. It was simply there, the way gravity is there, the way the stars are there, patient, watchful, ready. The galaxy had learned the lesson once more, the same lesson it always learned, the same lesson it somehow always needed to be reminded of. The bar had no name that anyone could read. It sat deep in the lower levels of Crucible Point, a galactic station built into the hollow core of a dead asteroid. The air smelled like engine grease and burnt spice. The lights flickered every few minutes, because nobody had fixed the power grid in years. This was the kind of place where killers came to find work, and where the people who needed killers came to find them. Sketh stood near the entrance and scanned the room with his compound eyes. He was of Relfi, tall and thin, with a hard shell covering his upper body, and 4 arms that never stopped moving. He worked for Darul, the most powerful Velnoxi trade lord in 3 star systems. Darul had built an empire that moved cargo across the galaxy, and for decades, nobody had asked too many questions about what kind of cargo he was moving. But now someone had asked. A human had asked. And everything was falling apart. The human's name was Danny Cole. He was nobody special. Or at least he had not been nobody special until 6 months ago. He had spent most of his life flying freight ships between colony worlds, hauling food and machinery and medical supplies. A quiet man with a quiet life. Then his old friend Katie Moore, who had climbed her way up through the United Earth Coalition's diplomatic ranks, had talked him into taking a job as a diplomatic attaché. She told him he had a good eye for detail and a calm way of talking to people. She told him the galaxy needed more humans like him in positions where they could do some good. Danny had taken the job. And on his very first assignment, inspecting a trade dispute on a border station, he had found something in Darul's shipping records that changed everything. Hidden inside layers of coded manifests were logs of living beings, catalogued like machine parts, bought and sold across dozens of worlds. People from species that had not even discovered space travel yet, taken from their homes and shipped in cargo holds to buyers who used them for labor, for entertainment, for things Danny could not bring himself to think about for too long. Danny had handed the evidence to the Galactic Ethics Tribunal. The case was now weeks away from trial, and Darul's empire was cracking at the edges. Allies were pulling away, investors were running. The only thing standing between Darul and total ruin was Danny Cole's testimony. If Danny disappeared, the case would collapse. The tribunal needed a living witness. So Darul told Sketh to make Danny disappear. He gave Sketh access to 500 million galactic credits and told him to hire the best killer in the galaxy. Sketh had been confident. 500 million credits could buy a small planet. Surely someone would take the job. He was wrong. Sketh approached the Pale Knives first. They were a brotherhood of Rethani assassins, famous across the galaxy for their precision and their silence. They had killed planetary governors, military commanders, and corporate executives. Their leader, a scarred old Rethani named Drenith, listened to Sketh's offer in a private room, his pale eyes never blinking. When Sketh told him the target was a human, Drenith stood up and walked to the door. Sketh called after him, reminding him of the money. Drenith paused at the threshold and spoke without turning around. "We kill for profit," he said, "not for extinction." Then he left. Sketh tried the Obsidian Fang next, a massive Gorvathi who worked alone and was known for extreme methods. He had once destroyed an entire space station to kill a single target hiding inside it. The Gorvathi listened to the offer, looked at the data chip containing the target's information, and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just heard the most foolish thing in his long and violent life. He pushed the chip back across the table and walked away without saying a word. One by one, Sketh went down his list. Guild after guild, freelancer after freelancer. The answer was always the same. Some were polite about it, some were not. A few simply stared at him as if he had lost his mind. One assassin, a small and quiet Yelfi woman who had once killed an entire security detail to reach a target, actually looked afraid when she heard the word human. She shook her head and left the bar so quickly that she knocked over her drink on the way out. Sketh was running out of options when he found Lorvax. Lorvax was a Yadrathi, a species known for their patience and their long memories. He sat in a dark booth at the back of a bar called the Sinking Nebula, drinking something thick and blue from a cracked glass. He had completed over 300 verified kills across 9 star systems. He had never failed a contract. He had never refused one either. He was, by most measures, the most dangerous independent contractor alive. Sketh sat down across from him and slid the data chip across the table. He told Lorvax the target, the price, and the timeline. Lorvax picked up the chip, examined it, and for the first time in a career spanning 4 decades, he put it back down and slid it back. Sketh stared at him. He asked why. Lorvax told him a story. Years ago, a colleague of his, a very skilled killer, had accepted a contract on a human colonist living on a frontier moon. The target was alone, unarmed, living in a small shelter with no security. It should have been the easiest job in the world. The colleague went to the moon. He was never heard from again. Not killed, as far as anyone could tell. Simply gone, as if the universe had swallowed him whole. 3 months later, a human ship appeared at the hidden headquarters of the colleagues' guild. The headquarters was built into an asteroid that existed on no star chart. No one outside the guild knew its location. The human ship did not fire. It did not board. It simply sent a single message that played on every speaker in every room of the asteroid. The message said, "We found you. We will always find you. Do not touch our people again." Then the ship left. The guild broke apart within a week. Its members scattered to the farthest corners of the galaxy, and most of them never took another contract again. Lorvax looked at Sketh with eyes that had seen more death than most species could imagine, and he said something that Sketh would remember for the rest of his life. Every killer in this galaxy knows the rule. You do not go after humans, not because they are strong, not because they cannot be killed, but because killing one of them wakes up the rest. And when they wake up, they do not stop. They do not forgive. They do not forget. They do not negotiate. They just keep coming, quietly, patiently, until the debt is paid. Sketh returned to Darul's private quarters aboard his flagship and delivered the news. No one would take the contract. Not for 500 million credits, not for 1 billion. The target was human, and that made him untouchable. Darul listened in silence. His silver eyes narrowed. His 4-fingered hands gripped the arms of his chair until the metal creaked. He was not a man who accepted failure. He had built his empire by refusing to accept the word no from anyone, and he was not about to start now. He told Sketh that if the professionals were too afraid, then he would find someone who was too desperate or too ignorant to be afraid. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were people who had never dealt with humans, who did not know the stories, who would take the money and do the job. Sketh wanted to argue. He wanted to tell Darul that the stories existed for a reason, that the fear was not superstition, but survival instinct refined over centuries of painful lessons. But he had worked for Darul long enough to know that arguing with him was like arguing with a star. It burned regardless of what you said to it. So Sketh nodded and went back to work, carrying with him the growing certainty that his employer had just made the worst decision of his life, and that before this was over, they would all pay for it.